as well. Wesley Smith is joining us now. He's executive director of the Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau. Been looking forward to this conversation all week. I'm told you got some fantastic stories about the state, Wesley. It's great to have you on.
Good morning, Scott. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you letting me be here today.
So I've been through Greenville a few times, but it's not a place I've been able to visit often. It's a beautiful area, and you got a lot happening there in Washington County.
Well, it is, and it's just like the rest of the state. I'm sure it's finally starting to green up. We get a little spring weather. I just had to mow my yard yesterday for the first time, and you know what that means, Scott. Here comes the tornadic weather. So it all comes together.
So the concept is you've got to mow the lawn in time for the storms to really let the grass grow faster.
Exactly, and then keep the yard too wet for you to mow for another 3 weeks.
Right. How much tourism are you bringing into the Greenville and the Washington County area? Is tourism up these days since the pandemic ended a few years ago?
Tourism has been up. Pretty constantly for the past 15 years, and that's true statewide. It's sort of an amazing success story for Mississippi, and all my colleagues and I are pretty proud of it. But yes, post COVID, it has come back pretty incredibly. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was just reading about how much money the coast is expected to bring in this week with spring break activity on the coast, but really Mississippi offers a lot to do year round, and that's one of the attractive reasons to come visit Mississippi.
Well, that's exactly right. Up in our area, we have a huge amount of outdoor. I've got probably 5 or 6 lakes in my county, so we have people from all over the Midwest and the near West that come in and fish, hunt, that sort of thing. And of course, all of that, people don't think about it in their day to day, but it makes a huge economic impact on our state.
Where are your visitors coming from? Are they in-state visitors who are looking for a short weekend getaway, a nice little staycation type thing, or are you getting visitors from out of state too?
Well, both, a little bit of everything. Most of our hunters looking for public land or fishermen looking for tournaments are from out of state. We do get a lot of weekend, in-state staycation kind of thing. And then in the Mississippi Delta and some other parts of the state, it's not universal, but we get a lot of international visitors. A lot of them interested in our music history and blues history, that sort of thing.
Yeah, let's talk about the blues in the Delta area. If I'm a blues guy, where do I go? What do I do?
Well,
what
I would suggest is what I would suggest is you pick where you want to end up at night. You either plan a trip around a festival. There are music festivals all over the Delta, all over the state, really, but blues festivals all over the Delta. They happen, throughout maybe 2/3 of the year when it's not blistering hot or freezing cold. And but I would pick where you want to end up that night. Hear some live music in Greenville or Clarksdale or Indianola or Greenwood, and then in the day. You might plan around using our Mississippi Blues Trail markers and that map. If you go on the Mississippi Blues Trail app, there's a GPS function, so you can sort of route yourself around the Delta just using that app and sort of follow that history in the daytime and see where you want to end up at night and hear it live.
So what's the big one? Is it the Highway 61 festival? Is that the big festival?
Well, Highway 61's in Leland. It's a great one. And, of course, my neighbors to the north in Clarksdale, Juke Joint Fest is coming up in the not-too-distant future. And then the granddaddy of them all happens in September, the third weekend of September, and that's the Mississippi Delta Blues and Heritage Festival here in Greenville. It is the oldest, longest continuously running blues festival in the country. Believe it or not, Scott, it was second. It was the second one created after San Francisco, of all places, and the San Francisco Fest unfortunately folded some years back. So Delta Blues Fest is number one.
So I'm guessing though you can get some great blues music at any of the juke joints in the area at night.
Absolutely, yeah. It's still here, still a living art. We still have younger folks coming in. A lot of folks are familiar with Kingfish from Coahoma County, who won a Grammy, and he's part of a great success story of Clarksdale sort of taking hold of training that next generation, giving that music education, that arts education, which again, I sometimes get on my soapbox on here. I don't have the solutions, but we need to be figuring out how to increase that arts education for our kids because it's so much of our heritage here in Mississippi.
Are you concerned at all that the blues heritage may die? I mean, when you think about the blues and you think about music coming out of the Delta area, obviously names like B.B. King come to mind from Mississippi. Johnny Rawls, who's become a friend of mine over the years, and I get to see him play at least once a year. Love Johnny. I mean, is there a concern that there's not a new generation of up-and-coming blues stars?
Yes, there's always a little, but somebody always appears. I could name you 6, 7, 8, 10 artists that are younger that you just haven't heard of yet. And blues' time as sort of a leading music, has passed unless we get some miracle. But the art form will always be alive, and it's always the roots of so much that came after. And there's always an interest. I'll tell you, Scott, I spent 5 years working at the Blues Foundation in Memphis, and it's a nonprofit. It puts on it used to be called the W.C. Handy Blues Awards. Now it's just the Blues Awards. But it's kind of like the Grammys of the blues. And it has affiliate members all over the world. There are blues societies all over the world. And it's just like a club, an association of people. Well, they are literally worldwide. So that interest in our music and our heritage is there, and it is not dissipated. And all of those local societies are promoting blues in their area. People still want to hear live music. It's hard to believe sometimes after COVID because it's taken us a while to get back out like we used to. But people still want to go out and be around other people, get off their device and hear live music. And music's one of those things that brings us together. So it's alive. I do worry about it. I do worry. We have a lot of worries in the Delta, but it's still there. It's thriving in its own way, and I know it'll continue on.
We're talking to Wesley Smith, Executive Director of the Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau, here at Mornings with Richard Cross. I'm Scott Sands. What else is there to do in that area if you're looking for a little getaway?
Yeah, well, kind of depends on
Viking Cruises a lot. Does the Viking Cruise dock in Greenville, maybe?
It does, Scott. They were here yesterday in 2023. Steve Azar, of course, who has a show on SuperTalk. Steve and I created a show for Viking's Guest. We got a phone call from a vice president of Viking in Switzerland, and he gave us 2 weeks to create a show. Something you'd want about 6 months to plan, but it went very well. It's within 6 weeks after our sixth show, it was their highest rated passenger rated stop on the Mississippi River. And in November of 23, they told us, and this is will be unbelievable probably to a lot of your folks, we were the highest passenger rated stop on planet Earth of any stop Viking makes worldwide. And so that's going great. They've just signed a 5-year contract. They're quite happy with Mississippi. They also stop in Natchez and Vicksburg, and we're trying to help them as much as we can because that industry is going to grow. They're planning on building more ships and bringing more people to Mississippi, and of course, we all want that to happen.
Wesley, can you stick around? I want you to share a story about Mississippi's tie to the Beatles as well.
Beautiful. Love it.
Mornings with Richard Cross. I'm Scott Sands on SuperTalk Mississippi. You know, I could have mentioned this too, Wesley. I don't know if you're aware. Johnny Rawls' last album was actually produced where I'm working out of in my home studio in Toledo. So it's kind of the ties. We do a big blues festival up here as well. So it's good to have this kind of connection. Wesley Smith is Executive Director of the Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau. This is Mornings with Richard Cross. He'll be back on Monday morning, I promise. My name is Scott Sands. You can find me on X at Scott Sands Media, the Scott Sands Show on Facebook. Of course, the C Spire text line is still going as well. Wesley, we're talking about the blues and stuff. I mean, the blues really helped originate a lot of the rock and roll music we love today. It's really kind of got a foundation in Mississippi blues, and perhaps the biggest rock band of all time. You can make an argument for other bands as well, the Beatles, and there's a Mississippi connection to the Beatles as well. And I wanted to hear the story. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, so we'll start rolling through it here, and it's kind of timely, actually, Scott, because this story kicks off in March. So 103 years ago this month, there was a young lady named Vivian Carter, born in Tunica County, Mississippi. And after spending the first 6 years of her life in the Mississippi Delta, like thousands of African American families, obviously before and after her, she moved with her parents as part of the Great Migration out of the South, moved to Gary, Indiana. And that Great Migration changed everything in America, especially culturally and especially musically. And Carter herself would play a major role in those changes. But I'm going to tell you, Scott, you may know this, but just for the listeners, Gary, Indiana, where she moved, is situated about 25 miles from downtown Chicago on the southern tip of Lake Michigan. And it started as a company town. It was founded in 1906 by U.S. Steel and named for Elbert Henry Gary, one of the founders of U.S. Steel, in addition to Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and Charles Schwab, some sort of titans of American industry. And Carter, as she grew up, she went to Roosevelt High School there in Gary, and in 1939, she worked in the Quartermaster's Corps during World War II, first in D.C. and then in Chicago. But she always had this love of music, affinity for music. Well, in 1948, WGES, one of the great radio stations in Chicago, they had a DJ. It was kind of their top DJ. His name was Al Benson. And he conducted a contest to find new DJ talent for the station. And Benson himself, by the way, was a native of Mississippi, part of that Great Migration. He had moved to Chicago, but he was from Jackson originally. And he had a super popular show with the residents there on the west and south sides of Chicago. And those areas obviously would continue to grow in population as the migration continued. Well, by 1948, he was so well known among Black Chicagoans, he was named the honorary mayor of Brownsville by readers of the Chicago Defender. So let's go back to Vivian. Benson holds this radio contest to find a DJ, and Vivian Carter won it. And the prize was a 15-minute segment on WGS, and that launched her radio career. She actually worked there for a time, but was not paid very much, struggled financially. And in just a handful of months, she moved back to Gary.
And being in radio and struggling financially is something I can relate to.
I understand. These are universal stories through time. I know it's
universal truths.
That's right. That's right. Well, she kept sort of hearing that call. She wanted to be part of the music industry, and she soon landed a job back in radio. She worked for several stations, and she finally landed at WWCA in Gary. And for 6 nights a week, she hosted a radio show there called Living with Vivian. And her show was a mix of blues, gospel, R&B, and something new that appeared to be catching on at that point called doo-wop. And teenagers, black and white, would come to the studio to watch her through the window as her show aired. That's sort of a universal story as you look back through the history of radio and popular music as well. But many of the records Vivian played were by independent black artists, and she and her then boyfriend, Jimmy Bracken, thought the music would sell, this independent music. People were just having records cut. She thought it would sell if it had some record company backing. So in 1950, she opened Vivian's Record Shop in Gary. And in 1953, she and Jimmy Bracken took 2 big leaps together. First, they borrowed $500 from a pawn shop and created their record label, VJ Records. And the name was a play on the word DJ and also on their first name. So V for Vivian, and they spelled it out, VEE, and J for Jimmy, JAY. And they also that year actually exchanged marriage vows and officially became partners in life and business. So the first act VJ Records signs were some friends, some other Roosevelt High alums, a group known as the Spaniels. And their first release was Baby It's You, which climbed to number 10 on the charts and set up their second release, which most people will probably remember, Good Night, Sweetheart, Good Night, which rose all the way
Right.
to number 5. Scott, I'm gonna try to avoid. I get the urge to sing, and none of us will enjoy that. But
Yeah, you
you
don't
may
want me
need
to
you to
doing that
sing some of
either.
these. And that's right.
No,
Uh,
nobody wants that. I've already made enough enemies this morning. I don't need to sing.
well, they released "Goodnight, Sweetheart, Goodnight," and of course, many a dance over the years has ended with that song. But and that created enough financial success for the label that they actually moved to Record Row in Chicago, just a few blocks down from Chess Records, which is another very important independent label in America's music history. But VJ was on its way, so Carter and Bracken signed a stable of artists and a variety of different styles and had a lot of success. They signed a Dunleith, Mississippi native who'd been working at the Armour meatpacking plant in Gary and had previously been turned down by Chess Records, and that was Jimmy Reed. Reed's VJ records are some of the most influential in American music history, and you would have a hard time finding a blues or rock band that hasn't covered at least one of
What,
his songs.
Wesley, I think we might need to fast forward the story a little bit to get to the tie-in with the Beatles here.
Sure. Yeah. Well, basically, they go on. I will tell you just some of the artists they're associated with: John Lee Hooker, Memphis Slim, Eddie Taylor, and then as they progress, the Mamas and the Papas, Gladys Knight, Dee Clark, Jimi Hendrix, David Gates of Bread, Linda Ronstadt, and Cher, and the Four Seasons. But they get their greatest success in '63. There was a young band coming up in Liverpool, England, and their record label, EMI, was trying to get American distribution, and they were affiliated with Capitol Records out in LA. And Capitol turned it down. They didn't realize what was happening. And VJ actually signed the deal to bring the Beatles to America for their first distribution. And VJ put out Introducing the Beatles. And the album, that was the first Beatles album released in America. It had I Saw Her Standing There, Love Me Do, and their cover of the Isley Brothers classic Twist and Shout. 6 days later,
really,
Scott, Capitol Records
really kicked off
realized.
Beatlemania.
No, well, that's it. But less than a month later, they would land at JFK Airport in New York. Paul gave they had a massive media press conference there, and they were asked who they were most excited to meet in America. And Paul McCartney responded, Bo Diddley and Muddy Waters. And the journalist said, who is that? And he said, you don't know who your most citizens are, which would tell you kind of how enthused they were with the music of America and Mississippi. But a couple of days after they landed the plane, they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and Beatlemania was here. And it all goes back to Vivian Carter, born in Tunica County 103 years ago.
I think that's a great story and really showcases something we were talking about earlier, and the importance if we're going to want the rest of the country and the world to understand the cultural impact that Mississippians have had on music, on literature, on art, then we need to share these stories and let more people know about the people who have played an influence in the culture that we have today.
100% agree. There's Mississippi has a lot of tough history, and we don't need to ignore that, but we have a whole lot of things to be proud of. You can make an argument, and I often do, that modern pop culture was basically created because of Mississippi, and there are a whole lot of little items that would prove that along the way.
Great story, and a story about the Beatles that I wasn't familiar with. Wesley Smith, Executive Director of the Washington County Convention and Visitors Bureau. So nice to meet you, man. I enjoyed the conversation.
You too. I'd love to do it again.
Mornings with Richard Cross continues. I'm Scott Sands. Again, be aware of severe weather possible later this afternoon. Probably around 5, we'll start to see some of these severe storms start to move in the area. High winds, hail, tornadoes, all possible through tomorrow, possibly affecting some of your St. Patrick's activities that are planned for this weekend. Click the weather tab at supertalk.fm and stay tuned to your SuperTalk Mississippi stations for any severe weather threats.